Alistair and the All-Purpose Umbrella, Season 1, Volume 1. Written by Michael Trupiano and Nicholas Howard. Narrated by Brian G. Lamb. Episode 1, The Checkmate Scenario. Chapter 1, Where to Begin. For the longest time, people have argued on how the universe really began. But for argument's sake, and the sake of this story, let's say it began with a bang. An incredibly big bang that caused everything as we can know it to come into being. Radiation, gravity, matter, and time all played very important roles in every mixture and combination of order and chaos. But our story begins a very long time after that first spark of existence. As it would happen, time itself is a focal point of our story. Not just yet, but centuries in our future, humankind will become the first time travelers to figure out how to go back in time. Plenty of people know how to go forwards in time, and most of them do it naturally. But humans were the first ones to figure out how to go contrary to the norm. They might not have been the first species to figure out faster-than-light travel, or even teleportation. But of all the species, on all the planets, in all the universe, time travel became our specialty. So, naturally, because of the dangers and possible misuse of time travel, the first thing we had to do was find a way to police it. There are a number of agencies set up all over the cosmos to safeguard the future and make sure no one makes a mess of things. Time police, time agencies, historians, architects, and tourists all set their stakes on the pillars of history, and our story is focused on one of the smaller agencies. Small though it may be, in the end, it was the most important. The Chrono Constabulary was established near the edge of explorable time and right on the third planet of the Sol system, no less. The year our story takes place is 2997, relative time, in the Chrono Constable's headquarters. A futuristic warehouse of sorts filled with all manner of high-tech gizmos and technological marvels. But, as with the beginnings of many a story, something had gone terribly wrong. A bloodied and beaten Chrono Constable, dressed in a green and black leisure suit, shambled down a burning corridor to the control center, a massive bridge of a room where all the constables were dispatched to patrol the past and safeguard the future. He toggled switches and knobs only to find the controls unresponsive. He caught a break and was finally able to bring up the communications array. "Bartholomew speaking, Bishop of the Chrono Constables. I need all constables to report in immediately." He took his finger off the button, and nothing but static came back over the line. "Calhoun! Delgado! Ephraim!" There was no response as Bartholomew tried frantically to reach the other constables. He set his brown and gray European traditional parasoled umbrella with a classic brass-capped U-handle on the console before him. He was so engrossed in what he was doing that he didn't notice a shadowy figure with a well-trimmed goatee approach him from behind. The figure placed his hand on Bartholomew's shoulder, and the constable spun on his heels to face the intruder. "What's wrong, Bartholomew?" asked the man. The Chrono Constable was awash with relief. He looked over the man before him, who wore a black Edwardian suit and a bowler hat. "Delgado, thank heavens you're all right. You're not going to believe what you've missed." "Oh?" said Delgado, keeping a tight grip on his own all-purpose umbrella, highly modified and with a black parasol instead. "Why is that?" "I have reason to believe that the same person who has been enslaving the universe for the past few hours has also been tracking down and taking out the other Chrono Constables," Bartholomew informed. Delgado quirked an eyebrow. "Every Chrono Constable?" Bartholomew wiped his forehead. "I haven't been able to find Ephraim, Gladys, Hyacinth, or anyone." Delgado walked closer to the console and stood next to his fellow constable. "So it's just you and me, then?" "Not quite," Bartholomew began. "Whoever altered the time stream did so with a number of kidnappings and assassinations all over the past. All of them seemingly random." He held Delgado's interest. "And one of the time streams hasn't stabilized yet. I've sent Alistair to try and rescue one of the victims," Bartholomew explained. "Oh, is that right?" Delgado adjusted a setting on his all-purpose umbrella. "Alistair lives?" Delgado pressed a button on his watch, and a dozen men teleported into the room in a brilliant flash. They seemed to be cyborgs that wore white jumpsuits, dark visor glasses, and finned helmets that sported antennae and flashing lights. They lunged at the other chrono constable. Bartholomew was grabbed by one of the cyborgs. "Delgado!" He biffed the cyborg across the jaw and knocked him back. Bartholomew then grabbed his umbrella from the console and managed to snag another cyborg under his leg with the U-handle. The cyborg fell back into a few others as the constable fought against the invaders. They did their best to overtake him, but, as strange as it sounds, he was far too skilled in fighting with an umbrella. Bartholomew gained ground against them and returned to the console, only just as Delgado blasted the controls with a bolt of red lightning from his own umbrella. The panel exploded and knocked Bartholomew to the floor of the constabulary. The cyborg swarmed Bartholomew and overtook him. Taking away his umbrella, they held up the lightly burned constable before Delgado. "Very good, Bartholomew," Delgado smiled. "You fared quite well against my persuaded." Bartholomew pleaded. "Delgado, stop! Realize what you're doing! You're destroying the entire timeline! You're—" He could have gone on, but Delgado interrupted the captured constable. "Preparing this galaxy and all the known universe for what is to come, this didn't work. Our little constable experiment. It's not going to be enough to protect this universe from the impending threat." Bartholomew seemed puzzled. "What in blue blazes are you talking about?" "It's not your concern anymore, Bartholomew," Delgado started, adjusting some of his umbrella settings from his watch. "You don't protect the known universe anymore. I do." Bartholomew shook his head. "Even if you kill me, they'll stop you. The chrono constables won't let you get away with this." Delgado laughed. "Is that right?" The dark-clothed madman reached behind his back to lift his coat. Hooked over his belt, Delgado had 4 all-purpose umbrellas. He tossed them to the ground in front of Bartholomew. The persuaded who held the captured constable's umbrella dropped it atop the pile. It was then that Bartholomew realized that his former friend had taken each of those umbrellas from a different fallen chrono constable. Every glimmer of hope that he held on to faded from his eyes. "So," Delgado began while adjusting his umbrella. It charged up, humming as it prepared to fire once more. The madman aimed his weapon at his fellow constable's face. "Where is Alistair?" Chapter 2. Night, 3rd Class. When one thinks of nowhere of particular interest, their mind might roam to a little-known town in England known as Pablishire, and probably without even meaning to. Further out from nowhere in particular rested the peaceful residence of Dr. P. Harris, and furthermore, a know-when time would be the year 1974. However, this particular know-where and know-when is precisely where our title character was told to go by his superiors. Within the residence of Dr. Harris was a young, intelligent-looking, book-smart woman who sat in a tweed armchair writing in a composition notebook. The house itself was very humble, well lived in, and a few decades out of style. She was dressed in a red and brown Schrader shirt dress, flats, and narrow glasses. She ran a pencil through her blonde bob-cut hair while thinking. Something came to her suddenly, a revelation that caused her to erase several lines from her notebook before completely rewriting the equation she had been working on. Her concentration was broken midway through as a kettle she'd forgotten whistled. She carefully set aside her notebook on a nearby coffee table and made her way to the kitchen to pluck the teapot from the stove. Amidst the tea-making, she noticed a flash from outside the kitchen window. She squinted, adjusting her glasses, only to find that whatever it was had seemingly vanished. Her intelligent mind easily put it aside as just the light catching on her glasses frames, while she poured herself a cuppa. Behind the house, though, the flash, as it turns out, was not a trick of the light, but rather a brief moment where a window in time opened to deposit a chrono constable in the woods behind the Harris house. A young man wearing a frock coat over a matching vest and a very out-of-place flight suit under the ensemble. He wore goggles around his neck, a fedora, an ascot, spats, and several other mismatched pieces of time across his outfit. He took off his hat to run his hand nervously through his short-cut black hair, before taking a deep breath and hooking his umbrella onto his shirt collar. The constable took a folded black and white computer print out from his jacket pocket and read through the manifest. It had a picture of a mustached, tweedy old man with the name Cambridge Professor, Dr. Philip Harris, as well as the address 619 Gillette Lane, Publisher, England, listed. The constable pulled the goggles from his neck and donned them as he said, "Computer, location." A disembodied voice replied in a soothing tone, "Publisher, England, 1974. No, the man hesitated to think of the right terminology. "Computer, address." The disembodied voice replied again, 619 Gillette Lane. He checked the printout once again and then stuffed it back into his jacket pocket. He rushed through the garden, out of the back of the house, and up to the door. He flung open the screen door, only to find the heavy wooden door behind it locked. Within the house, the young woman heard her back doorknob jostle before the distinct sound of a screen door slamming shut. She made her way to the back of the house, yet saw no one. But that was when a panicked knock came from the front door. The knocking was persistent and relentless, forcing her to move faster to answer. She opened the door just a crack and peered outside, only to see the strange-looking constable, who peered back with a goofy grin adorning his face. He poked his head in. "Hello, is Dr. P. Harris in?" "Who, may I ask, is inquiring?" she replied in turn. But the goofy time traveler barely waited for her reply before using his umbrella to knock open the front door. He barreled in and knocked the young woman to the ground in the process. "Dr. Harris, this is an emergency!" exclaimed the young time traveler. "Dr. Harris!" She found herself shocked to be on the ground suddenly. Shock that immediately turned to anger as she watched the boisterous idiot recklessly run about her house as if she wasn't there. He was frantically looking for someone, but she didn't care who as she stood and chased him down. She feistily came at him from behind and knocked him what for to the side of the head with a blow that landed him sitting on a chair at the kitchen table. "What the bloody hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I'm trying to find a Dr. Harris, so if you would please move out of the way." He began to get up, only to be knocked back into the chair by the feisty woman. She stared him down. "Explain." The man didn't know what else to do. I need to see Dr. Harris as soon as humanly possible." "I'm Dr. Harris, you idiot," she explained, crossing her arms. "You're a what?" he asked. "I'm Dr. Penelope Harris. People call me Penny, and I am who you are looking for, you bombpot." The man had a look of horror on his face as he touched his watch. He seemed to skip in place, switching sitting positions and dispositions very quickly. "So you would be the daughter of Philip Harris?" "Correct." "And your father is dead?" "Also correct." The strange man looked puzzled and touched his watch again, changing positions just as before, but now looking a bit more worried. "Was your father murdered?" he asked. She shook her head, still taking in his ridiculous look. "No, it was a heart attack 10 years ago. Why are you asking me?" He interrupted her by pressing a button on his watch, clearly marked pause. After doing so, the young woman and everything around him froze in place. He held up his watch and a small, blue, shimmering, holographic head projected in front of him. The man's head wore a pair of welder's goggles and appeared a bit worse for wear. "What's going on here, Nicodemus?" asked the constable. "I'm with the man's daughter, and she says he was not murdered." Nicodemus spoke to him from the watch.
"Yeah, you missed the assassination by like a decade. Maybe 2 or 5. Someone went back and took him out young. There must have been some kind of deflection on the time window broadcast when you went back, Alistair."
Alistair went wide-eyed. "I arrived before the temporal shift. This is bad. Very, very bad." The holographic head nodded.
"He died about 12 years before she was born now, so you'd better get out of there."
"That's terrible," said Alistair as he looked at Penny. "She's going to... Has anyone else come back yet?"
"About that," began Nicodemus. "I didn't want to stress you out in the field, so I was going to wait to tell you after you got back, but no. We've sent every constable into the field to stop one of these assassination points, and not one of them have come back."
Alistair sighed, suddenly feeling a great deal more weight on his head. So this was some kind of draw to lure the chrono constables into traps? Nicodemus shrugged, or as much as a holographic head can shrug.
Philip Harris never really changed the world with any of his works. The only reason to kill him in the past is because you know a chrono constable will investigate."
"About him," Penny finished. Alistair didn't seem to notice as time restored itself around him, and prattled on, very worried. "Okay, well, this timeline is going to shift soon, so I need you to get me a window out of here." Penny looked at the man who, from her perspective, seemed to have jumped and was now talking to a small, disembodied floating blue head. "What the hell is that? Who are you talking to?" Alistair froze and looked to the woman. The head on his watch spun around to look at her as well. He looked to his all-purpose umbrella, which seemed to have fallen on the floor. The pair of them stared for a while before he looked to Nicodemus. "Right. Well, I have to go." Alistair deactivated his watch, picked up his umbrella, then stood and stretched in an attempt to seem very nonchalant as he slowly slinked past the shouty woman. "Were you talking to a little floaty head on your watch?" Penny asked, following the time traveler. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alistair said as he picked up the pace and made his way back to the front door. Looking out the front door, he noticed 3 of Delgado's Persuaded in the front yard. He slammed the door and leaned on it to think for a moment. He made his way to the back of the house and looked out the kitchen window. Persuaded began walking into the backyard from the woods behind her house. "Yes, you do," said Penny. "I'm not stupid, and you were talking to a little man on your watch." He turned to her, becoming more frustrated by the minute. "Yes, all right. I was talking to a little floating head on my watch, and I'm about to do it again. Ooh, magic." Alistair reactivated the communicator on his watch, and Nicodemus's head returned. "Nicodemus, get me a time window right now." The head replied,
"I have some really bad news."
"And now the bloody thing is talking back?" exclaimed Penny, a bit shocked by the marvel of technology. "Who are you, Dick Tracy? What's going on, and who are all those men in the yard?" Alistair took a deep breath as he looked out the window again. "They're... criminy, look at all of them. Who are they? Nothing good. I really should be on my way. Nice having a little chat and all, but there really is no more time." "What did you want with my father, and why did you think he'd been murdered?" she asked. "Because he was," Alistair explained without explaining anything at all. "That isn't possible," Penny replied. "He passed away from natural causes 10 years ago." Alistair turned off his communicator and went back to the front of the house with Penny in tow. He looked out the front window as more and more Persuaded walked up to the house now. "I suppose it doesn't matter whether or not I tell you. Long story short, time travel. They went back about 30 to 40-ish years ago and killed him then. The people in the yard are very bad time travelers under the control of someone who is taking over the future. I came back to stop his murder, but was sent to the wrong decade, and now time might be catching up to us very soon, which is also very bad." She looked to him, and then to the men out the window. "Let's say I believe you, just for fun, and if I did believe what you were saying, I'm only 28. "Yeah, I was afraid you'd say that," he sighed, and ran to the back of the house, then pointed out the window. She looked outside as the world in the distance appeared to simply fade away to nothing. Chapter 3. The Dangers of Umbrella Travel. The future grew dim for Alistair and Penny as the Persuaded made their way to the small house on Gillette Lane. As the drones of Delgado closed in, events on the temporal plane collapsed before and after them, limiting their time in all of existence. With the time window, the matter transit system the constabulary ordinarily used for time travel, on the fritz, the constable had to think fast. An explosion came from the back of the house, and the Persuaded were drawn around back, leaving the front of the house open for escape. Alistair burst from the front door and ran down the driveway, with Penny in pursuit. She was flush with questions that he didn't have the time to answer as he pulled up his communicator and spoke into his watch. "Delgado?" Alistair exclaimed to Nicodemus. "Half the galaxy." Nicodemus nodded.
"It was on the security tapes. They destroyed the time window and left nothing but a smoking crater where Bartholomew was. Those things after you, they called them Persuaded."
Penny was about to speak as Alistair picked up the pace to get away from her. "Okay, well, you have to do something. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it fixed enough for one jump and get me out of here. The whole reality is about to collapse, and..." He would have gone on longer, but his sentence was cut short by laser fire from the house. The shot sparked around Penny and him, so he turned, jogging backwards to look at the oncoming enemies. Reality at the edge of the long driveway began to vanish, fading to nothingness before them. Alistair stopped and pushed Penny along, guiding her to run with him towards the laser fire. "There are about a half-dozen of these persuaded here who are armed to the teeth," Alistair said while dialing something into the ring around his watch. He aimed his umbrella at the persuaded and fired back at them, seeing as they were by the majority of what remained of the collapsing reality space.
"You're gonna have to use your umbrella's emergency temporal jump," Nicodemus informed him.
Alistair pulled Penny aside and ducked behind a tree to avoid converging laser fire. He looked at his watch again. "No, thank you. Not interested in having my atoms scattered across the time streams. Just get that time window up." Penny was still trying to take in everything that was happening around her. "Do those men have laser guns? Where did you come from?" She caught Alistair's attention. "When did I come from? That's what you should be asking." Penny peeked around the tree but ducked back when another laser grazed the bark. "You're a nutter!" Alistair peeked around the other side of the tree, and then to the encroaching nothingness that was consuming everything around them. He sighed, then looked to the holographic projection of Nicodemus. "I hate you. How many can it take?"
"Oh, the girl?" asked Nicodemus. "I guess it could take 2, but you'd have to hold hands."
"Take 2 what?" she asked, realizing suddenly what he meant. "Take 2 where?" Alistair ignored her and continued to adjust settings on his watch and umbrella. Penny sighed. "Take 2 when?" Alistair's face lit up. "Home! Look, this timeline is literally collapsing around us. It's fading away, partially because of you. Now, you can stay here and fade away, or—" More persuaded fire blasted the tree. Penny looked at the madman before her. "Or get blasted to bits." "No, well, maybe, but no," said Alistair. "The or I was going to suggest is you can try to jump out of this time stream with me, using my umbrella, which is mostly untested and incredibly dangerous." Nicodemus sought to hurry the pair along.
"It's not that dangerous. I told you, I tweaked your umbrella a bit before I sent you out into the field."
Penny blinked. "Who are you?" "Me? I'm Alistair. Chrono Constable Knight. 3rd class." He smiled, trying to look reassuring. "A knight?" she asked just before the persuaded coordinated and began to fire rapidly and repeatedly at the tree. Alistair opened his umbrella and offered his hand to Penny. "Do you trust me?" "Should I?" she asked. The edge of nothingness as well as the persuaded were nearly upon them. Alistair shook his hand in front of her. "Look, we're running out of time and space and everything in between, and several other very hard things to explain." Penny grabbed his hand, and Alistair pressed a button on his umbrella just in time for the world to fade away. The pair reappeared in the future, but in the exact same place as before. The year was 2997, and surprisingly, Penny's house was still the same as it was over 1,000 years in the past. The skyline was filled with buildings that stretched higher than Penny would have thought feasibly possible. Flying cars soared through the skies overhead, and monorails zipped by at incredible speed. In place of the tree they stood by was a sign in her yard that said, "Under preservation of the Historic Society." Unfortunately, in place of a half-dozen persuaded, there were now 100, all of whom had been programmed to hunt down and capture everyone who had not yet been converted. Alistair could only stare in panic. "Criminy!" He pulled up his communicator once again. "Nicodemus, right time, but you programmed the wrong spatial coordinates." The persuaded nearest the pair reached out and took hold of Alistair and Penny. They struggled and pulled away. Alistair activated a taser baton setting on his umbrella and began fending off the persuaded as they swarmed upon them. He was only just able to keep the cyborgs from overtaking them. Nicodemus seemed busy and took a little bit to reply.
"Yeah, sorry about that. I tried my best to compensate for the time jump deflection field. I'm updating the umbrella coordinates, but it'll take a few seconds."
"You bloody idiots!" Penny said, punching and pushing off a few of the persuaded herself. "I trust you, and where do I wind up?" "You're somewhere, so that's an improvement," Alistair retorted with a huff as he knocked over a group of persuaded. He grabbed her hand and pulled her through the crowd, fending off persuaded as they ran. "You were about to be erased from time altogether." Penny did her best to keep up with the lanky, crazy time traveler. How is it possible that I avoided that if my father is still killed?" "The umbrella," Alistair managed to inform as they ran back into her house once again. He slammed the door behind them and turned to face her with his back against the door. "For temporal jumps, it takes a reading, stores the information in the pattern buffer, and then protects that information within 200 yards of the umbrella." "What does that mean?" she asked. The persuaded began pounding on the door as Alistair said, "It means stay close by." It was then that the persuaded broke through the front window and entered the house by force. Alistair and Penny remained against the front door with nowhere left to run. As luck would have it, Nicodemus popped up on Alistair's communicator once more.
"All right, try it now."
Alistair pressed the button on his umbrella just as they were gripped by one of the persuaded, and the trio vanished from Penny's very overcrowded house. Within the control room of the Chrono Constabulary, there were burn marks and wires sparking over every console and through several holes in the wall. The time window, a large metallic door-shaped object, lay broken in several parts against the wall nearest the primary control console. There were several shelves filled with technological components of every shape and size in the center of the room. There was a sudden flash of light as Alistair, Penny, and the persuaded men they brought with them teleported in right next to the broken time window. Alistair was caught off guard by the extra passenger, and the persuaded yanked his all-purpose umbrella away. The persuaded drew a gun from his tool belt, but before he could fire, he was blasted in the chest by a ball of energy that knocked him across the room, and he hit the ground out cold. Alistair and Penny looked to the source of the energy source to see Nicodemus wearing a blue flight suit and a leather shop apron. He had welder's goggles on his brow and work gloves on his hands. He held an energy shotgun in one hand while puffing a cigar with the other.
"Bring a persuaded with you. Smart. Not to mention a girl."
"That guy was from a very complicated situation we jumped into by that mistransportation," Alistair explained, "and I couldn't just let her die." Nicodemus puffed his cigar as he tossed the shotgun to one of the shelves and went back to his work on the time window.
"Well, die is an oversimplification. More like overridden. But the umbrella will keep her with us. Probably."
"She has a name," said Penny. Alistair snapped his fingers. "Oh, right. Nicodemus, this is Pelanquili." "Penelope," she huffed. Alistair nodded. "Yes, that." She sighed. "Just call me Penny, you Burke."
"Entertaining as whatever this is," began Nicodemus. "If you two are done, we've got a lot of planning to do."
Nicodemus led Penny and Alistair to a table that very much looked like a machine one might play an arcade game at, and took a seat at a small control panel. He punched up a few commands, and the table lit up with a black and green display of blueprints, diagrams, and star charts as he laid out his plan for the small group.
"We still need to come up with a way to cut off his control signal," said Nicodemus.
"Control signal?" asked Penny. Alistair nodded and leaned back against a metal support column near the computer table. "Yes, those people who were after us are under the control of a madman, along with half the galaxy, apparently." Penny was stunned. "Blimey, half the galaxy?"
"More like 85% now," Nicodemus corrected.
"Criminy," Alistair sighed. "How can we cut off his signal, then?"
"Carefully," Nicodemus began. "We don't want to kill the persuaded mind linked to his control, just free them. Which will be harder than it sounds, because we would first have to get onto his command ship. Once there, we'd need to prep the system for signal cutoff, and then send Delgado himself to where he cannot connect to his control signal any longer."
"Where would we have to send him for that?" asked Alistair. "With that kind of signal, couldn't it reach just about anywhere?"
"That's why I've been working on this," said Nicodemus, as he held out a small clasping device.
It looked like a sink drain stopper, jammed with circuitry and blinking red lights. "Isn't that just an arrest bolt?" asked Alistair. "What's an arrest bolt?" Penny asked in turn. Alistair rolled his eyes before explaining, "When we lock up time criminals, we don't put them in a paddy wagon. We stick an arrest bolt on them and they are instantly teleported to processing. After processing, they get sent to the time prison." "You act as though I'd have some way of knowing that," Penny scoffed to the Chrono Constable. Nicodemus held the device up once more before the others.
"This isn't an arrest bolt. I've made some rather difficult modifications to the whole device."
"So what is it then?" asked Alistair.
"There really isn't a name for it," said Nicodemus. "I guess you'd call it an impossible bolt."
Alistair nodded. "So, an impossibolt." Nicodemus looked to Penny with a gaze of exasperation before turning his attention back to Alistair.
"Yes, that's a much better name for it. Now shut up. See, I've modified this device with a quantonium power booster so that it has enough power to punch a hole in the universe."
"Then what does it do?" asked Alistair.
"It punches a hole in the universe," Nicodemus replied rather matter-of-factly. "Then it sends whoever it gets slapped onto outside the universe. So when we attach it to Delgado, it will send him to the one place where he couldn't possibly connect to his control signal."
Penny crossed her arms. "Punching a random hole somewhere in the universe sounds a bit dangerous."
"Oh, it is," Nicodemus agreed. "But we will. Somewhere in the neighborhood of Neptune, actually. The only problem is coming up with some way of getting close enough to actually put it on him."
The group all gave pause to think on the matter. Penny paced about, wondering just what she had managed to get herself into, and if she might ever be able to return to her old life again, now that she was tethered to a time traveler on a version of Earth that was ever so alien to her. She walked over to a shelf packed with high-tech gadgetry of every manner and implement, and picked up a device that looked like a very fancy gun with an inferiority complex, when Nicodemus reached out to stop her.
"Put that back!" he exclaimed. "Set it down carefully or you might blow yourself to smithereens."
She set it down carefully, per instruction, and backed away from the device. "Really?" Nicodemus shook his head.
"No, but it's really expensive."
Alistair suddenly had a flash of brilliance as his face lit up. He stood before the pair with a large smile across his maw. "I've got it. All right. Here's the plan."